sometimes people have the false impression that I'm predicting, oh, hyperinflation in the United States of America. And it's like, that's not even the point. The point is that it's possible. And so, yeah, I don't think hyperinflation is going to happen in the United States or perhaps even Europe with the euro, perhaps not ever, and perhaps not for a long time. Perhaps, we all go extinct and die first. But the fact it's possible is the whole point. And I've looked very long and hard, you have too, but we can't yet find a way in which that occurs for Bitcoin. And so even if Bitcoin does hyperinflate, die, and collapse or whatever, let's say it's possible. Bitcoiners don't like it when I say that, but let's say it's theoretically possible. Let's say there's a 1% chance that occurs. Like, we know from history that these fiat currencies have an extremely high probability of hyperinflation. And we've already seen multiple like happening now. You have where Nigeria, Sri Lanka, Lebanon, Argentina, especially the last couple of weeks, and then Venezuela, Zimbabwe, all those examples. But yeah, point being that it's like I think people think that Bitcoiners are absolutists, and perhaps we are. But even if you're not an absolutist, to me it's obvious because the probability of a fractional reserve system deteriorating to zero is inherently higher than a full reserve system. And this isn't a political stance. This isn't an anti-USA stance. This has nothing to do with this being America. This has nothing to do with the political aisle. It's just, as Voss would say, it's just math, or Saylor would say, it's just energy. And if you're violating the laws of physics, it's inevitable that something has to give. So, yeah.
Yeah, another thing going off First Republic that I think is interesting is the downside volatility in First Republic is well deserved, right? Like there's actual risk that their liabilities exceed their assets, right? And that's what basically why a bank run occurs. Whereas you contrast that with Bitcoin's volatility, Bitcoin goes up in these parabolic
Mhm.
bull runs and then it falls the 80% or the 85% or the 70% that Bitcoin does. And it's not like Bitcoin is falling because its liabilities are greater than its assets. Like it doesn't have a balance sheet. It's still 21 million Bitcoin. The monetary properties are still the same. The core principles of why Bitcoin is better money than dollars, gold, raised stones, salt, glass beads, whatever, those properties still exist. And the volatility is just due to its rapid adoption. And then it got overextended and now it's like falling back
Yeah.
down. So I kind of want to get your thoughts on Bitcoin's hyperbolic adoption. What do you think there?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a great question. I think, yeah, bridging the gap there, most people view Bitcoin volatility as inherently risky because they're used to thinking of volatility in terms of stocks. If a stock is super volatile, like First Republic Bank, it's because you have these major shifts in assets versus liabilities, or they had a horrible earnings release, or this, that, whatever. But the difference with Bitcoin, or with any commodity for that matter, is that there's no cash flows, there's no CEO, there's no yield, there's no liability. It's like all these things, they're different. And so, yes, to your point, Bitcoin's volatile and then it goes down and up just like stocks. But the difference is that it can't have its debt obligations or it can't lose a customer because, it's different because it's not a security. And so that's true to the downside. Like that's the point I've been making thus far, but it's also true to the upside, to the point that to the question point you're making there, that we inherently think it's the same to the downside, and so we also inherently assume that there's only a certain amount it can go up. We think like, oh, well, stocks, like say Apple or Amazon or whatever, like, well, they can go up 100x or 10x. So yeah, maybe Bitcoin could go up 10x or 100x too. Maybe it goes from 30,000 to 300,000 someday, or maybe someday in the far, far future, maybe $3 million, if it's going to be the next big thing, like how Apple was the next big thing. And I believe that's flawed logic because I believe, again, conversing the downside instead of the upside, I think it's the same thing. I think Bitcoin is much more resilient against downside than stocks. Give me one stock that's crashed 80%, four times now in the last 10 years and recovered every single time. Like, you can't. I'm pretty confident of that. Maybe there's one minor penny stock that's an exception, and I'm sure someone will find it and then hate on me for that. But point being that because it's fully reserved, every time there's a downside, it doesn't gap down to zero. And because it's fully reserved, when it makes that new all-time high, when there's new adoption, it could go significantly higher than what other systems can because they can't sustain either the downside or the upside volatility, and Bitcoin can. So, yeah, your precise question, I think, about adoption cycles. Yeah, I think Bitcoin will continue to be volatile, and people that buy Bitcoin should know it'll continue to be volatile. And this will probably offend people, but whatever. I think Bitcoin will only become more volatile. And I think a lot of people don't think that. They think, oh, someday Bitcoin will mature and then it will lose volatility. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Bitcoin should, in my opinion, become only more volatile in the future because the rate of technological change is only getting faster. The rate at which fractional reserve systems trend to zero is only getting faster. And the rate at which the marginal cost of energy production is going to zero is only becoming faster. And so if we assume those things, and the total number of net humans in the world is becoming volatile, there are more humans. I mean, we have larger populations. So point being that as the world gets faster, like Bitcoin should only get more volatile. Maybe there are brief periods where it's not, but I think a hyperbolic curve is very probable. So yeah, I think someone buying Bitcoin today should fully expect it to go up 10x in price in a very short period of time, and then expect it to crash 50, 60, 70% of the time. Again, if you're measuring it in terms of US dollars, if you're measuring it in terms of one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin, then it's never volatile. But yeah, anyway, that's just some ramblings of mine. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I know you've been talking to Peter Dunworth, who beat you on the most bullish Blockware Intelligence podcast ever recorded, and because you originally held that title. Have you been talking to Peter? Like, what have you guys been talking about? What is your take on his extremely bullish
Yeah.
future for Bitcoin? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I guess first of all, it's not a competition. I'm not trying to be the most bullish. I just or trying to be the most moon boy. It's like it's literally just as ironic as it is, it's from my risk averse opinion. Like if this thing is as low risk as it seems in comparison to everything else, its value should be orders of magnitude more than everything else combined. So like that's the whole reason that the bullishness is the great irony is that Bitcoin, if we're correct, is lower risk and higher upside than everything else, which is what makes it so obvious and so mind blowing. People don't take at least a 1% allocation or 5%. But anyway, it's not a competition. But Peter, he has price. I don't know if he would call them targets, price targets, but he has very high numbers. He just throws them around in the same way that people think I'm insane throwing $100 million per Bitcoin around. He's throwing around like 7 billion or 100 billion, and it's yeah. I like yeah. Peter's been a good new friend of mine. We've spoken maybe 5 or 6 hours in total about his thesis. Well, actually, no, more than that probably at this point. But yeah, I've recorded a podcast with him, hopefully, and I hope to release that. It's basically diving more into depth of his methodology. But his whole idea is similar to it's similar to others, but it's expanded on to include derivatives markets and everything else of that sort. So I don't have as much experience, obviously, in accounting as he does. He has a background in that, so I would defer to people with that background. However, with that said, as I've read much of his work and I've listened to his thoughts, I mean, I don't know if it's right. I don't know if he's correct or fully correct, but if there's even a 1% chance that he's correct, it is astronomical. I mean, it's simply absurd. Even if he has a 1 or 5, 10% chance of being correct, it's more than we can possibly fathom. And I think there's a much higher probability he's correct. Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 90%, but ultimately at the end of the day, that's all you need to know because Peter doesn't know the future. I don't know the future. Jerome Powell doesn't know the future. And ultimately, as someone that's trying to preserve our purchasing power into the future, our priority should be what are the possible paths forward, what are the possibilities, and what's the probability of each of those paths occurring, and then how do I adjust based on that thesis, based on that information. And I think Peter's idea of Bitcoin being used as that like global accounting settlement network, and it just all those ideas, which are very far away, but it's truly mind blowing of how high Bitcoin's price in terms of dollars could go, and how much more importantly for people listening, how how insignificant all other accounting systems in the history of man could become in comparison to Bitcoin. It's literally like comparing modern banking to Sumerian tablets. It's like, they'll still exist, but they'll be in a museum. So, yeah.
Yeah, Peter has some awesome takes that are like really mind bending, and it makes you really think about what's going to happen with the
Yeah.
future of Bitcoin. I'm excited to listen to the podcast you recorded with him. That'd be great.
Yeah.
We've got him coming back on the Blockware Intelligence podcast. We've got his brother coming on the Blockware Intelligence podcast too. So those will be
Yeah.
fantastic episodes. But like
And
thinking back, oh, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, and I hope Peter does make the rounds, because I hope people come out and debate him. That's one of the reasons why he wanted to talk to me. He was like, "Luke, I have to talk to you. Take a look at this and this," and he sent me a bunch of stuff. It was like, "Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where the thesis is wrong." And as a side note, I think it's what a lot of people outside Bitcoin don't realize. Like, that's why we talk so much, is because we're always trying to figure out where we're wrong. And that's why he wanted to talk to me, and I'm glad. But anyway, I hope he keeps going these shows, and that people actually debate him, that have the education, the background, and the intelligence to, uh, yeah, just try to better the thesis and find flaws, because I can't this far, and that's the exciting and terrifying thing. So I'm glad you're buying Bitcoin, but what were to happen if you were to be hit by a bus tomorrow? Would your family, would your children, your spouse, or your extended family be able to access your coins, or would it be a donation to the network? What were to happen if something were to happen to you or your memory today? Would you lose your life savings? How are you protecting your Bitcoin for yourself and your own lifetime and your future generations beyond you? Okay, do you have an estate plan protocol for your coins? Do you have your self-custody down? Do you still have coins on exchanges? Are you still trying to figure out ways at which you can help pass your seed phrase on to the next generation? Are you trying to find ways to have your business, your church, or other organization involved with Bitcoin and adopting Bitcoin on their own balance sheets? Are you trying to find a way to encourage and convince your family members to have more comfort and be able to sleep at night with you buying Bitcoin? At the Bitcoin Advisor, we can help address all these questions and many more, including collaborative custody, UTXO management, and everything else, KYC, non-KYC, all these questions. We can help you address those at the Bitcoin Advisor, to ultimately where you can have better sleep at night and your family members can have better sleep at night, thus increasing the incentive and justification for you having increased position allocations to Bitcoin. Yes, the Bitcoin Advisor does charge a fee. In my opinion, it's incredibly reasonable. It's the most reasonable fee in the entire Bitcoin space. And it's why I work there, because I believe we provide the most amount of value for the cost that we charge. And most people that join us, ultimately, because they have such increased conviction and because they are avoiding so many of the common pitfalls people have, either when they don't have their own custody or even when they do have their own custody, because they're avoiding pitfalls and because we're adding increased peace of mind, we help them increase their Bitcoin allocation. So if you want someone in your back pocket to ask these questions, to prompt new thoughts, to help you understand the trade-offs of every possible custody solution and every way to protect their coins, not just for them, but for their future generations, please contact me in the link in the Bitcoin Advisor. If you like Bitcoin, if you're trying to save Bitcoin for your future generations, and ultimately you want to stack more Bitcoin. So if you want those things, please click the link in the description. You can talk to me at the Bitcoin Advisor. Thanks.
It's his price targets are kind of crazy, but I like generally agree with his thesis and your thesis in that, thinking back to, something like 1970, to purchase or to be able to store a terabyte's worth of data may have costed $1 billion back in
Yeah.
1970. It may not even have been possible, right? Now it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You have one right there. It probably costs maybe $100 or so. And it's
Yeah.
so like that's the rate of deflation that has been occurring in certain industries over the last 50 years, but it could be starting to occur in all industries over the next 50 years as technology accelerates faster and faster. And we have this new unit of account where it's the only thing in the world where we can commit infinite amount of time, infinite amount of energy, infinite amount of resources, and we can't make more of it. And when you put it that way and you zoom out on a long enough time horizon, it just seems kind of hard to argue against.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's ultimately, like I said earlier, that's where my bullish price predictions come from. It's like, because it's like, I'm not a trader. I have no idea. Like, it's just, I'm just taking one step at a time. Like you said, it's like, okay, I have the assumption we can't find a way to destroy this thing. If Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un and presidents of the United States can't figure out how to kill it, like I can't figure out how to kill it. So it's like I take that assumption. It's probably going to survive. Okay, then I take the presupposition, I take the assumptions of what makes good money, and then I take the assumption that humanity will continue and not self-destruct and have a prosperous future, and combine it together. It's like, well, the best money absorbs all that productivity, and if this continues to survive, it's the best money. Well, then it should absorb all the. I mean, it's really that simple, and that's what has been exciting. When I went to Boston and gave this whole thesis, I was like, that's what's exciting for people to kind of have that click and understand the that Bitcoin is not a pessimistic, oh, the U.S. dollar is going to die, and we're going to go back to blah blah blah, and like apocalyptic, dystopian world. It's like it's inherently, the Bitcoiners inherently are not pessimistic on the world. They're just pessimistic on scams. I mean, so anyway, yeah,
Yeah, and I think like some people would say, like you say, the world is going to get so much more productive, and some people would argue, oh, well, it's obviously those companies are going to capture that wealth creation. But then you got to look back and argue, yes, that maybe that's happened in the past because people have had no other way to store wealth, so
yeah,
they kind of just stored wealth and equities. But in reality, it's like all of these companies are directly competing with each other, and the profits that they're making, you can't just make profits forever. Like it's not that easy. Markets are relatively efficient. If someone's making profits, you have 8 billion other people trying to attack and take those profits from you. And it's like, okay, if everyone's competing and everyone's getting insanely productive, where's all of that actual productivity, all that value going to get captured? Well, it's like in the best money, and the best money is
yeah.
Bitcoin.